Welcome to another episode of Beyond Risk and Back. Thank you for joining me on what I think is a really important show. I hope you agree. And if you are a parent of a teenager, and I want to say teenage boy, and the gentleman we have here, our expert today, it does work with men. He does work with married men. Got him on here because I want to talk to him about our teen boys, and I'm sure it'll come up about teen girls, but just know we're talking about pornography today. This show, out of the gate, I'm going to say this is sensitive material. Fair warning, parents, understand we're going to be talking about some pretty graphic sexual things potentially. Let's get to the truth as quickly as possible. JK, I cannot butcher your last name, pal. You're going to have to please tell me how to say your last name so I can honor it.
It's Amazy. JK Amazy, like amazing.
JK Amazy, thank you so much. You work with men and sex addiction, porn addiction. How on earth did you end up in this work? Why are you doing it?
I run Elevated Recovery. We are an addiction recovery firm that helps men who are struggling with sexually compulsive disorders. We've been doing this for about 11 years now. And I myself got into it because I struggled with a pornography addiction. Unfortunately, I was exposed to pornography at the age of 8 years old. And a quick story around that is I'm 39 years old. I'm part of the I guess we can call it the latchkey generation. Well, mom and dad left us at home, and just it was the line was don't let anybody in for any reason. That was it. That was the rule. And so I was raised up here, but we would have a cousin come around sometimes just to check in on us, an older cousin while mom and dad were out. I am a huge comic book fan. And she was reading this comic, and I was just determined and dead set that I was going to find out what it was about. So I searched and I found it. Turns out it was a pornographic comic. Now, at 8 years old, folks, I knew it was naughty. I knew I was going to get whooped if I was caught looking at something like that. And I was very curious about sex. And I did not have the ability to get aroused. But what happened was there was a change in state when I saw this. Because I was like, this is what sex is. This is the naughty stuff that they've been hiding from me all this time. Now, in retrospect, I didn't know this was a state change. I just knew that it made me excited, and there was adrenaline and there was taboo. What happened right after that, and some of you might be able to relate to this if you have a child who's struggling with an out-of-control behavior with pornography. Every time I experienced rejection, every time mom and dad said I couldn't have something or the other, I knew that if I looked for nudity, my state would change. And I kept doing that all the way till I was about 14 years old, 13, 14, and I discovered masturbation. And then I was off to the races from there, because once I experienced orgasm, I was able to connect that to all the nudity that I was viewing. And throughout my adolescent years, rejection from girls, my arms are growing longer than my legs, I'm ugly, I have acne, all the crap we go through. Pornography was always there as a best friend, a first relationship, a confidant. And I used it all the way up through college. I went to college in Wichita State University, Wichita, Kansas, which is where I'm located, all the way up to 23 years old. And then it got into acting out behavior. So that was my introduction to it, Aaron. That's how I got into this predicament.
Let me ask this out of the gate. Is there a healthy age to be introduced to pornography?
I don't think that even matters. I don't think it matters. I have parents asking me all the time. They're concerned about how to have the conversation about pornography, which usually involves introducing it. And I just tell them that in today's day and age, with the speed at which technologies proliferate, it's just a matter of when your child is going to, not if. And statistically speaking, they're going to be exposed to pornography way earlier than you would hope that they are. In fact, I would say it's safe to assume, if you're listening right now, you should assume that your child has been exposed to pornography. It's not the most hopeful message. It's just a realistic message. When people ask about, well, what of the development of our children's brains? I work with men from the age of 18 to my oldest client, who was 95 years old. He was a lecturer at a university, one of the oldest, I won't say his name, but one of the oldest tenured professors in the United States till he passed away. And one of the things I've noticed is that most men don't fully reach I would say, cognitive maturity till they're about 26 years old. And studies show that their brains are still developing. So I don't think there's any safe age to introduce a young man or woman to pornography. But I think very early on, we should set guardrails, expectations, and not just explain what pornography is, but explain what pornography seems to them. And what I mean by that is explain to them that pornography is not the same thing as intimacy. Pornography is not the same thing as love. Pornography is a bastardization of sex, so to speak. If they can understand this about pornography at the very least, when they're exposed to it, we can mitigate the impact it's going to have on them.
There was a situation I had in a teen rite of passage program I was running. We had separated the boys and the girls, and we were talking to the boys, and it was an ask me anything moment. And of course, the topic ultimately comes around to sex, because here I have the men, the elders, saying, ask us anything. And one boy stands up and he started to cry, and he said, does sex last longer than 15 seconds? And the men, we giggled, of course, because that brings up jokes we tell each other about how long you last. And I said, well, I hope so. But he was clearly invisibly upset. And I said, why 15 seconds? And he goes, because all the porn clips are 15 seconds long. And that was such a massive wake up, like, wow, he really thinks that's sex. And that's where the conversation started of, that's not sex. Those are actors. That's not real what you're seeing. There's cameramen, there's a sound person, there's makeup, there's a table full of food, 20 feet away from them. This is truly confusing to a young brain, is seeing this as an outlet and a crutch. Now, I want to ask you about the chemistry behind the crutch. Right? I explained crutch is what we use to not put weight on an injured limb until such time that we should begin to put weight on the limb so that we can ultimately use the limb again without the crutch. There's a healing process. And the problem is that cannabis, self-harm, it works. It's a crutch. We don't have to deal with the injury. We can do this stuff and we don't feel the pain of the injury. How is porn affecting us? Why do we use it as a crutch? Why wouldn't I just stick it out and face the rejection and find real intimacy?
Most men use pornography to medicate stress, strong emotions, loneliness, a lack of intimacy, and unresolved issues. Unresolved issues would, in most cases, be trauma. And when it comes to the trauma, with a lot of people who are medicating it with pornography, they're not really medicating, I'm generalizing here, but they're not really medicating the trauma itself. The issue that they have is they have not truly accepted the fact that the traumatic event itself happened. So they are constantly wishing that that traumatic event didn't happen. If it's a childhood trauma of any type, why did that have to happen to me? I wish it didn't happen. And a lot of times I find that when we dig deep with them, that's the issue that they're using to medicate with pornography, in addition to stress and so on. The problem for a lot of young men and even older men who started early on in life is that they didn't have the opportunity to develop healthy coping strategies. So things like accountability from other men, what you just described, being able to talk to elders, being able to talk to their peers or an older brother. In our program, I call myself your brother, JK, your brother in this struggle, because the thing I always wished I had was I wished I had an older brother who just told me in very direct terms, like, dude, just fucking knock it off. He didn't need to sit and have a sit down with me. I just needed a dude to just be like, bro, that's not cool. Like, just tell me, like, that's going to mess up your dating life. Like, to be very real with me. I didn't have that. So I decided that I'm going to do this and be everybody's big brother. I'm getting a little old, so I probably have to be your uncle in this, in this struggle now. But those are the things that they're using to cope. But here's the important thing to realize. When you start depending on something like pornography and you use it as a crutch, it changes your entire biochemistry. One of the things that it impacts is your brain, specifically your prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is in charge of what we call executive function, which is the ability to prioritize and to make decisions fast. And this directly impacted me. And I see it impact a lot of young men today who say they're constant. They say, oh, I have ADHD, I have ADD. I was like, let's get your behavior under control first before you dump all of these things on us. It doesn't mean that they're not real or they don't exist. It just means when you're addicted to pornography, you find it very difficult to make decisions, to stick to things for long periods of time, because you literally do not have enough neural connections in your prefrontal cortex. On top of that, what happens with basic tasks that you need to go through a little bit of stress to master? To get through mastery in anything, there's a period of stress. You push through it and you get to the next level. You don't get the compounding effect, because every time something gets difficult, whether it's dating and talking to women, whether it's studying for a test, whether it's picking up a new skill set, whether it is going to work on a consistent basis, the minute you hit that stress point, the minute you experience strong emotions of rejection, what happens? You need something to change your state. And that's pornography. But that's not the big deal there. The big deal is when you keep doing this year after year after year, your success never compounds in those areas. So already you lack self confidence in that. You lack self confidence in your ability to complete anything, which doesn't help either, because pornography literally destroys almost every aspect of a man's masculinity. The things that are necessary for him, I would say instead, let me take that back a few steps. It destroys all the things that are foundational to a man's masculinity and sense of self. One of the big things that impacts a lot of men is the shame that comes from this. The shame is conditioned. Sometimes it is social, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's religious shame that comes up. And the problem with that is that you don't have a good sense of self-worth. So the primary statement that a lot of men have, I'll give you a quick example. We had a brother who was in one of our general programs. We got about 450 men in that program with multiple coaches working with them. And he wanted to upgrade to work with me personally because he'd hit some roadblocks. And he missed his welcome call with me, which is a no-no, because we have a value system and an agreement system. The coach who was working with him said, JK, he had a breakdown. And I was like, what was it about? It's like, he just doesn't feel worthy enough to speak with you. I was like, why? Because he's worried that if you really knew who he was, you wouldn't want to talk to him, that you wouldn't love him, you wouldn't want to be his big brother in this struggle. Which is crazy, Aaron, because I'm one of the few people, or the only people, I'm the last person who would judge him, because I have done it all. I have committed all the sins. I have done it all. So that poor sense of self-worth is one of the things that a man's sense of self-worth is one of the things that's robbed so early. So that, in addition to the impact that it has on the brain, really makes it an insidious problem, Aaron.
At brabapp.com, I have posted a parenting masterclass. The content is everything I have ever taught a parent in the past 20 years of working with parents in crisis. But here's the deal. It's $99. I want every parent to be able to have access to this course. So please go to brabapp.com, B-R-A-B for Beyond Risk and Back. brabapp.com, brabapp.com. Check it out for yourself. Cannabis and mushrooms are being studied to be used in opioid depression. Ketamine is now used very effectively, I might say. Agree or disagree, in depression, and ketamine therapies are. I know treatment facilities who use THC for opioid reduction. Is porn in any way, shape, or form? Is there a reason other than an indulgence and ultimately an addiction?
You phrased the question earlier as, can it be helpful, I believe. And I think that's a very our era kind of question, Aaron, because we're seeing a lot of medicinal, you mentioned ketamine and all these things being used medicinally. So you're asking a question of the era, can it be helpful? Maybe that's not the question, because some of these things have existed since the beginning of time, right? And in different times, they weren't asking, can it be helpful? In different eras, it was accepted. Different cultures, it was accepted. And in others, it was demonized. It just depends on the era you find yourself. we find ourselves in an era of things being legalized, at least in the West. You travel to other countries in the world, you don't want to carry some ketamine through the airport in Kuala Lumpur or Singapore. You're in for a really bad you're in for a really bad time.
What the hell do I do next as a parent? How do I approach those words that I've never said myself? How do I sit and have a conversation with my 9-year-old, my 12-year-old, my 14-year-old?
The thing is, a lot of parents get carried away by the sheer shock of what their child is viewing. Because the first thing you do is go like, I don't even do this stuff. This being that I am trying to protect and bring up in the world, how are they exposed to this? What's it going to do to them? Parents need to realize that they themselves sometimes go into a state of shock, and the response that they have to their child, while it might seem well-meaning, might might not be the right one, because for a lot of
If the conversation starts with "Get home right now," you're probably not in a good
you're at
beginning.
home just like shaking, just pacing around, calling your husband or your wife, going just like, oh my God, you need to get home right now. Like, you need to get it. We need to talk about something, right? That is not the states to have this conversation. And I had a client too who joined because he was addicted to pornography. And let's just get one thing out of the way, okay? If one of you, if you're a parent listening and you know you have a compulsive behavior with pornography, you have to take the first step and start taking care of it, because it is very rare that there are young people today who are exposed to pornography where their parents are not. While there are a lot of young people who still come across pornography from what their parents had, like, I came across my dad's porn stash under his bed. And like you, it wasn't catalogs, it was more like National Geographic. But now, because millennial dads, has his cell phone, kids are less likely to come across it. But that doesn't mean dad isn't viewing pornography either. So you need to address that, because that hypocrisy, when it comes up in you, that's going to cripple your ability to reach out to your child. Just wanted to get that out of the way. But the conversation itself should not be based on the intensity of what you saw your child viewing or you caught your child viewing. That should be factored in. You should find out how far your child has gone. And this means not just having the conversation and educating them about sex and intimacy, but also finding out if they've acted out. This is so important. Right now, Elevated Recovery, we've got a little over 30 team members. And many of the women who work in our company are there because they had an ex who was addicted to pornography, or because they have a child who is addicted to pornography. They are connected to the mission of what we do at Elevated Recovery. But an interesting thing that I've noticed is that for a lot of kids now, there's an acting out part of it that is included, which means if they're on IG, if they're on Instagram, they're chatting with somebody. They're chatting with somebody. That's the dangerous part. They're exchanging this with somebody. I consider chatting with somebody, exchanging things in the DMs, doing it through TikTok, all of that is acting out. I consider your daughter's teenage girlfriend sending her Fansly or her OnlyFans and saying like, "Hey, I'm not really showing myself. I'm actually using an anime or a hentai avatar on Fansly, which they now have." I consider that acting out. And that should be the first thing that you check for when you have the conversation. Like, are you talking to other people about this? Who are you having conversations about? Like, how far does it go?
How do I know that my kid is getting addicted? What are they doing differently now?
Once your kid is compulsively using it to the point of obsession, a simple test for this would be to set up boundaries. It doesn't matter whether it's a filter, it could be a Covenant Eyes, it could be any of the filters out there, monitoring them and simply seeing if they will bypass it. I know everyone says, but yeah, they will bypass it because they know how to bypass it. But we've seen kids who actually don't because they are afraid of the consequences. There are a lot of kids who will continue to bypass it, who will use other devices, who will use your device or their sibling's device to get past it. Once they start crossing the boundaries that you clearly set for them, it's safe to assume that it is compulsive. Now, when we talk about compulsive, we can just define it as behavior which is habitual and you try to stop it, but despite the clear negative impact it's having on your life, you continue doing it. Which means that if you talk to Timmy about it and Timmy says, yeah, mom, honestly, I hear what you're saying and I've been trying to stop, but I don't know. I was just on Xbox Live and it could connect to something and I just went. I don't know why. I just did. Why did you do it? I don't know. I just could. I know. But you told me. I know. I told you. But I just did. Compulsive. He's not being bad. He's not being naughty. He's not being headstrong. It is most likely compulsive. He can't stop. Now, the conversation as to whether you whether you have him speak to a therapist or whether you send him to Oxbow Academy out in the middle of nowhere in Utah is a whole different conversation. I think a therapist should always be involved for a consult if you can find one who has space on their calendar in 2023, unfortunately. But that would be a good place to start.
Somewhere between compulsive pornography viewing and acting out and perpetrating on others lives what? What are the behaviors before the crimes but after the compulsion?
I find the cries for help part very interesting when it comes to sexually compulsive behavior. It's easier to talk about it when it's with substance abuse, but when it's something that's behavioral and that is heavily rooted in shame and guilt, but mostly shame, you don't see the cries for help. It's very difficult to see it because there's so much shame. I was addicted to pornography throughout my teen years. And the only cry for help that I had was at one point I told my mom, I think, and the crazy thing is both my parents were medical professionals. My dad was a gynecologist. My room was his library. I knew what a vagina looked like, but I was still addicted to pornography because I had all the medical books. Yet my only thing was like, this is gonna sound funny. I said, Dad, I told my mom, I think I'm having, as I saw in the gynecology book, they called masturbation at night, like wet dreams, they called it seminal emissions. I think I'm having seminal emissions. And she's like, what the hell are seminal emissions? I was like, I thought you would know because you're in a medical field. She's like, I was like, white stuff is coming out of my pee pee. She's like, oh, that's just normal. That's normal. Just talk to your dad about it. But it's normal. And she just like she completely walks off. That's as far as it went with the cry for help. But I was watching some really messed up stuff. Like it was escalating. So I would say it's having the conversation first. And if you find out that your child is involved in it, look for the level of material that they're watching. Some examples would be if they're viewing material that's not in line with their identified sexuality. That is one thing. The second thing, if they're watching material that's non consensual, I would actually say material that's non consensual in nature, rape themed stuff, that would be the first place to start because there's nothing like vanilla pornography today. It's all rough and violent. And most young people can't tell the difference between something that is rough, primal sex and something that is non consensual. But the crazy thing about pornography today is that it fuses the parts of the brain that process violence and sex, particularly in men. Both those parts of the brain are activated. And that's the reason why a lot of the porn site algorithms trend towards violent pornography. Part of the mechanism of arousal for a man viewing pornography involves the release of testosterone first when he views pornography because it's synergistic with dopamine, which is the thing that's going to bring about the expectation of that. So testosterone first, then we have a little bit of release of dopamine, then adrenaline, norepinephrine, and so on. But that's why they go towards violent pornography. So once you start catching violent pornography, which is something that all our much younger clients, when they get started, when they come into our program at 18 years old, 19, 20, they always talk about that. They talk about, man, I'm watching some really violent stuff. I'm watching stuff that's related to gore. I'm watching a lot of transgender pornography. Any man who identifies as straight but views transgender pornography today usually went through the process of being conditioned. He had watched whatever is considered to be vanilla pornography today to the point that he became desensitized to it. In most cases, before he went to gay pornography, transgender pornography is the center point, usually male to female pornography, for the simple reason that the actors in those cases are overcompensating, which means that they're coming across as more feminine than the typical woman you would see in the street because they're overcompensating. And young men who have not had a lot of dating experience react in a very visceral way to that over the top feminine behavior. The reason why I'm going into detail with this is because there are a lot of parents that are going to come across that and get very confused as to why the young man in their home, their son, is viewing material like this, just so you understand a little bit of the psychology behind it.
I want to understand what is sex positive and what are consequences that you see effective when we're dealing with an externalized consequence source like a parent.
I'll answer the first question, and I'll actually defer to you for the second one, mainly because we do not work with too many teenagers. We work with legal adults, adults of legal age, and so our consequences are a little bit different when it comes to that, but I'm happy to share what they are. I'm absolutely fine with men masturbating. I don't have a problem with it. It is not something that I encourage our clients to do because we do have a lot of clients who come from different backgrounds. But I explain to them that it is the one behavior, that and consensual sex, or rather, are the two behaviors that are absolutely natural. And when we live in a world where there's so much technology around us, the place we begin is we begin with control of the behavior that is natural to us, which simply means that if you do not have access to sex, whether it is for religious reasons or you're not able to for whatever reason, then it's absolutely fine to masturbate if your sex drive is very high. If you choose not to, that's fine as well. What matters is that you don't do it in order to medicate any strong emotion. That would be the part of sex positive. And that's quite literally where it ends for us when we're talking to our younger clients. Now, when it comes to the consequences, maybe I need a little bit more context from you, Aaron. What do you mean by consequences?
Well, I mean, if you have caught your kid now utilizing pornography the third, fourth time, despite past consequences, I guess what have you seen or heard from your clients? They said, well, my parents did this and it actually worked. And let's go ahead and address the consequences that don't work, because I'm sure you've seen more of that, imposed consequences, self imposed or externally imposed consequences. That just is like, yeah, take the cell phone away. I can tell you that doesn't work.
The first thing that works are setting boundaries. Those don't work in the long term, but those are a good place to start. There's a finality to you saying that taking the phone away doesn't work. I would also say that none of the things I'm about to mention actually work. However, I do think all of them should be imposed for the sake of the child, for them to actually understand that they are there. I think a parent should find out themselves that taking the phone away doesn't work. The reason why is there's so much denial and rationalization among parents, and many parents try to impose what their parents imposed on them. So I'll have parents email me and they'll tell me, well, here are all the things I've done. I've put a filter on his phone, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, and where is he today? Well, he said he wanted to, he's been really good and he's been lately deciding to spend a lot more time at grandma's house. I was like, wonderful. He's watching porn at grandma's house. I don't think so because I have his devices and grandma does. He is watching pornography at grandma's house. That's just an example. There are endless ways that your child is going to cross that boundary, right? It comes down to this: your child must want to end the behavior because they've experienced the pain. There are three reasons why your child is actually going to want to end this behavior. It is out of love, out of duty, or out of fear. And it just depends on how you've raised him as parents, right? Out of love could be actually out of genuine love for you. Like he actually loves you, you raised him in a loving household, and he feels that pain, right? Out of duty, it could be dependent. I've seen older siblings who are very they are addicted to pornography, but they are very protective of their younger brother or their younger sister because they've watched some messed up stuff and they don't want their younger brother or sister to be exposed to that. That's something that's out of duty. I've also seen young men who have a more traditionalist view that said that's not what I should be doing as a young man in the family. And I like that as well, right? And then we have those who end their behavior out of fear. Fear could be this is what's going to happen to you if your behavior escalates. You're not going to be able to have sex. You're going to struggle with porn induced erectile dysfunction. You see all this messed up stuff here? Yes, there is a is it possible that I would act out and I'd actually do those things that I see in pornography? I don't want it to happen to you, but what do you think? Well, I'm afraid that I might end up doing it. Well, maybe that's a good reason for you to start ending this behavior. Having the honest conversation around love, duty, or fear is going to make your child more willing to work with you when it comes to this behavior, more willing to be accountable, more willing to be truthful. There's so many methods that you can impose. The only thing I will say is the moment that you notice that whatever methodology it is you're using, whatever consequence, if that consequence is inducing shame, you need to stop. Doesn't mean you shouldn't impose a consequence. It means you should look at something else. Because shame and isolation is one of the big reasons that a lot of men do not want to work with their parents. We are a non traditionalist program, and we receive, how would I say, maybe 2,400, it's under 3,000 applications a month. We have a wait list for our program. Frankly speaking, Aaron, I don't even have a pitch for you because we don't have space in our program until March next year. I'm not kidding. We have free groups. And a lot of these are emails from young people under the age of 18 who we legally can't even work with. We're not set up for that, but we do respond and I have a lot of material for them who are asking for help because I'm JK, their brother in this struggle, right? I have long hair. I'm jacked. I talk. I cuss a lot. I relate to them. I talk about my teenage years a lot, but they won't talk to their parents, but they'll talk to JK. Why? Because I talk about the shame. I talk about the isolation. I talked about how small I felt. I talked about being a loser. I talked about being insecure about the size of my penis. I talked about not knowing whether I could satisfy a woman or not. That's all I talk about and how I overcame all those things and put myself in a loving, committed relationship going on for 14 years right now by ending this behavior. And ultimately, that's what these boys hope for. But the shame thing, whatever the consequence is, Aaron, to those listening, if shame comes up, back off a little bit because once that shame is allowed to fester, they are going to close off to you. They will no longer trust you.
JK, how are parents going to look into your program? I'm at your website. You've got resources there. You've got the 7 secrets to eliminate porn addiction forever.
The two places to start would be, first of all, our podcast. Our podcast is called the Porn Reboot Podcast. We've got about just over 500 episodes. We release 4 to 5 a week. Go check it out. It's very raw, very real, very vulnerable. I cry sometimes. My clients are interviewed and cry. We all cry together. It's a very vulnerable podcast. Check it out. Our YouTube channel is Porn Reboots. You can find us on YouTube as well. We are shadow banned at 40,000 followers. Unfortunately, a lot of people who talk about freedom from pornography are shadow banned, but you can find us there. It's JK Mazy. You can search for my name, or you can search for Porn Reboot. And we've got about 900 or over 1,000 videos, unique videos by now, which talk about techniques for ending your behavior with pornography, how young people can deal with different fetishes they might be dealing with, how to have certain conversations. We talk about everything. If you have a son or a partner who's like, well, should I visit an escort? Should I engage in this fetish? Is it natural to feel this way? What is healthy sex? What are wet dreams? What do I do if I don't have sex for a long period of time? All the crazy questions. I love answering them, and I've answered them again and again. But most importantly, we also talk about how to develop true intimacy, what healing actually looks like, and we give a lot of people hope. That's the one thing that's missing for a lot of people who are struggling with sexually compulsive disorders. It's the hopelessness growing up in a world where you get on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and everything is sexualized. And you go like, am I the only one who can't control his behavior? Can I actually live without this? How do I function in a world where sex seems to be the currency or seems to be a requirement for everything? I give them hope that you can be happy, you can be successful, and you can be fulfilled. And that's what they need. They need to see more examples of people who are living free of this behavior in today's world, and more examples of people who are doing it and crushing it too. Not people who are just, they're like, oh man, I don't want to live like that guy. Like, that's boring. That's kind of a boring life. They need to see that life can be exciting and fulfilling as well.
JK brought up two really important things that we need to walk away with. First and foremost, the shame piece. In any kind of addiction, shame and guilt are the twin pillars. Those are the things that are supporting the problem. He talked about this completion of a cycle. And if a child is coming to you and saying, hey, I think I got a problem, or if you catch them in the midst of their problem and them acting out in the problem, and shame becomes a part of your corrective process, you are literally triggering the beginning of the addictive cycle again. Shame and guilt are the two primary things that empower addiction. And the use of the crutch is because of the shame of not being able to walk without it. So we never try. When a kid comes to you and says, I think I got a problem, step into that space with them. The second thing that I want to say, and I haven't talked about this story much, I was sent in to work with a 10-year-old who was addicted to porn and had gone to his parents for help. And we spoke because this kid has been kicked out of school. This kid is, he's got a lot of adoption trauma, kicked out of school, saying things to girls, inappropriate comments, things like that. And there'd been a lot of interventions, and they brought me in, and he and I were throwing axes. That's how we start. We throw axes. You get that body moving. And this kid is telling me everything. He's completely open. He wants to change. At 10 years old, he knows this is a problem that he needs to change. And as we were wrapping up after about 90 minutes, I said, of all the consequences that you've had to face that didn't work, what's the one that you still think about a lot? And folks, what this kid said to me floored me in 25 years of doing this work. He said, it was the fact that I showed Jesus pornography. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, my mom said Jesus watches everything I do, and I look at porn. So I feel really ashamed that I showed Jesus porn. When I related that to the parents later on as I was debriefing, Mom was proud of him for being a good Christian. I have nothing against Christianity. I have nothing against a child's understanding of Jesus' presence in your life. That's not what healing looks like. That's what shame looks like. This kid was terrified that he was showing the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, pornography. No shame on yous for porn addiction. It's not going to help. Huge thank you to Deepen Productions for their making this podcast sound amazing and helping me get it out into the world. Huge thank you to JK, amazing. And JK's website is elevatedrecovery.org. Go there, if nothing else, to get the information, watch those videos. He's got an ebook download. Get on his list. Just go there, check this stuff out, listen to the podcast. Parents, take care of yourselves first, your adult relationship second, and your children third. That's how we do our best work with our children. And if you love this episode, please go leave a review. That helps other parents find us. I'll see you next week on Beyond Risk and Back.